All right, welcome back everybody to Old Testament Survey. In this video, we're going to go on to the next section of the Old Testament canon, the history books. And there are quite a number of them here, and we're going to work our way through them, and we're going to start with the book of Joshua in this video. We'll just sort of introduce the book of Joshua and talk about the first 5 chapters. But first, we need to remember the story so far. So back in the Torah, in Genesis, God creates a world of beauty and order and wisdom. And then, of course, things go horribly wrong. And then they go from bad to worse with the flood and the Tower of Babel. Then in Genesis 12, very important chapter, God chooses Abraham. And Abraham's family become the people of Israel. And he chooses Abraham and Israel, of course, and never forget this, so that they could be the channels of God's blessing to the world and bless the nations and be witnesses for God in the world. But before they can bless the world, remember, the people are enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. Then God rescues them by his grace and with the plagues, and he brings them out of Egypt. And God makes a covenant with the people at Mount Sinai. He forms a relationship with the people and says, I'm going to be your God, and you're going to be my people. He gives them the 10 Commandments and some other laws so that they know how to live as God's people. And then God guides them through the wilderness for 40 years. That's the book of Numbers. And then they're camped outside the land of Israel, and Moses calls on the people to obey the laws of God so that they can show the nations what God is like, and that's the book of Deuteronomy. And then the book of Joshua sort of picks up after Moses dies, and the people are about to enter into the promised land. And God is about to keep his promise that he made to Abraham back in Genesis 12, that he would give him a land, a place where he and his family can live out their redemptive purpose to bless the nations for God. So here is just an overview of that 1,000-year period of history that these history books cover, from about 1400 BC to about 400 BC, 1,000 years. Starts with the book of Joshua, going into the land, Joshua the main character. Then we have this 300-year period of the judges. There are 12 judges. The story of Ruth occurs during that period. And then we get the book of Samuel, which introduces us to the first kings of Israel, Saul and David. And then the books of Kings and Chronicles talk about the divided kingdom, the northern kingdom called Israel and the southern kingdom called Judah. And in the north, there are these 19 kings. In the south, there are 20 kings. And the kings are supposed to be God's representatives and lead the people in obeying God and worshiping God so that they can bless the nations. That doesn't go very well, and God finally sends the people into exile. Jerusalem is destroyed, and the people find themselves outside of the land, in the land of Babylon. And then Ezra and Nehemiah, those 2 books talk about how the people of Israel are given a second chance and get to come back to the land and start over again. And the book of Esther is a story about this woman Esther and her faithfulness to God in the land of Persia. So let's talk a little bit more about the book of Joshua. This book is about the conquest of Canaan, or going into the promised land. And let's never forget the big story, which we've talked about many times, but it's a story of mission. And so we want to ask the question, how does the book of Joshua fit in to this mission of God in the Old Testament? Well, the answer is that it has to do with that promise to Abraham about the land. God is giving the people of Israel a land now. He's giving them a place where they can live out their redemptive purpose and be a witness for him. And of course, that land, we talked about this before, is placed right in the middle, really, of the whole world, right between Egypt and Mesopotamia. people would be traveling back and forth between the land of Israel, and so that these people of Israel, in the place where God put them, would have an opportunity to bear witness to who God is and tell these nations about this one true God. So God is keeping his promise of giving the people the land, which serves the mission of God. So here's just one verse from the book of Joshua that speaks to that mission to the world. This is from Joshua chapter 4. It says, God dried up the Jordan River, the people crossed over, and they went into the land. And then verse 24, God did this, and here's the mission part, so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. God is giving the people of Israel the land so that all the earth might eventually know who God is. So when we look at the book of Joshua, we can divide the book into 4 parts. Chapters 1 through 5, Joshua leads the people of Israel. Chapters 6 through 12 is about some of the battles that the people of Israel have with the Canaanites who are already occupying the land. Then in chapters 13 through 22, the people divide up the land, and each of the 12 tribes are given their particular territory. And then chapters 23 and 24 are Joshua's final words to the people of Israel. So in this book, we're introduced to a new leader of the people of Israel, and that, of course, is Joshua. Here's the very first verse of the book. It says that after Moses had died, Moses is dead now, and Joshua becomes the new leader, and God says, I want you to get these people ready and lead them across the Jordan River into the land. There's the theme of the book again, about land that I'm going to give them. And then verse 3, I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. So this book is about God keeping his promise to give the land to the people. Here's Joshua chapter 21 that speaks to that promise. It says, the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he swore to their ancestors. And the Lord gave all the enemies into their hands. And then verse 45, not one of all the Lord's good promises to Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. So really, this book of Joshua is about God and God keeping his promise to give the land. And he was faithful to keep that promise. So the first thing that Joshua does is he reminds the people to obey the law, or to obey the Torah. All those laws that were given back in Exodus and Leviticus and in Deuteronomy. Joshua says, be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. You're going to the land. And not necessarily strong and courageous to fight battles, but you need to be strong and courageous in obeying God's law, obeying God's Torah, reflecting his character, remember, so that it can be a witness to the nations. It's always about mission. So the first thing Joshua does is remind the people to live God's life. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about some of the preparations in Joshua 1 through 5. One of the first things that Joshua does is he sends out these 12 spies. Remember, there were 12 spies sent out in the book of Numbers, and that didn't turn out so well. This time, he sends out spies, and it goes much better. The Israelites are camped on this east side of the Jordan River, and Joshua sends the spies to Jericho. And in Jericho, they meet this woman named Rahab. Rahab is one of the Canaanites. She's not an Israelite. We would call her a Gentile. And Rahab takes the spies in and protects them. And so we see, in fact, she embraces God and his law. So one of the first things we see is God embracing and including Gentiles into the covenant. In fact, Rahab is a very important character. Here we see in the book of Matthew, in the New Testament, in the genealogy of Jesus, that Rahab actually ends up being part of Jesus' family. So God embraces Gentiles, and in this person of Rahab, she becomes very important in the family. So the next thing that happens is that the entire people of Israel are going to cross the Jordan River. And this story is told in Joshua 3. God says, take the Ark of the Covenant, let the priests carry the Ark of the Covenant, because obviously the Ark was a symbol of God's presence. God's going to go before them and in the front. And God instructs the priests to carry the Ark to the Jordan River and set foot into the river, and then the river will be cut off. It will part, just like the Red Sea did. So you can see this is sort of a repeat of that story in Exodus, where the Red Sea parted and the people went across. Now the Jordan River parts and the people walk across. Another act of God's grace in bringing his people to the land. So the people cross the Jordan River and they camp at this place called Gilgal. Now, as soon as the people cross the Jordan River, God instructs the people to set up a memorial, to set up stones, because God wants them to remember. He says, I want you to remember what I did. By my grace, I brought you into this land. I kept my promises. So when your children ask you about this memorial and these stones, you tell them what I did. And here, again, that mission verse in Joshua 4, God did this so that the peoples of the earth would know the Lord. So the next thing that the people do after getting into the land is that they practice these covenant memorials. They look back on their story, and they practice circumcision, which of course is the sign of God's covenant that you belong to me. And they celebrate the Passover, which is a celebration of God's deliverance and redemption out of Egypt. So the people look back, and indeed they remember what God has done. And then we have this call of Joshua, and it's very similar to Moses being called at the burning bush. So Joshua meets this man standing in front of him with a drawn sword, and Joshua asked him this question: are you for us or for our enemies? And this man standing before Joshua answers, neither. Well, that's not exactly the answer Joshua was looking for. Are you for us or for our enemies? And the answer is no. I think the point is that the question, real question is not, hey God, are you on our side? You're going to help us do what we want. But the real question is, will the people of Israel be on God's side? Now, as long as they obey God and keep his covenant, then God will bless them, as we found out. But if the people disobey, then God will actually fight against his own people. And we see that sometimes in the book of Joshua, and especially as these history books go along. When the people disobey God, God actually is not on the people's side, and he fights against them. So, the people here are looking back as they celebrate circumcision and Passover, and then they look forward. And it's not so much Israel versus the Canaanites, but really this is God's battle. This is God accomplishing his plan for the people of Israel in giving them a place, the land, where they can live out their redemptive purpose. So that's Joshua 1 through 5.